Welcome back to the 240SX 2JZ build, where today we will be assembling the head. So these ASIN oil pumps, I buy these on eBay in bulk. I have a few. I actually have one on my Toyota Supra right now that is currently making 750 horsepower and seems to be doing well. So I'm going to go ahead and stick with something that works until it doesn't. You want to do a quick inspection, make sure there's no burrs, no scratches, no breaks, cracks, or anything. And then you press in a new front main seal, and you'll want to reference the factory service manual as far as applying the new sealant as well as a torque spec. Now the torque spec on this is going to be 15 foot-pounds for every bolt. I like to alternate back and forth to make sure it's evenly pressed on. And the next thing will be the ASIN water pump. Again, I have one of these on my other builds, so I continue just to keep using what works. Take it out, inspect it, make sure nothing's bent, broken, make sure there's no binding, everything's working well, shiny, clean, whatever. Looks great. So putting on the water pump is going to be the same thing, alternating around and doing 15 foot-pounds while tightening this onto the block. We're going to put a new rear main seal into the main seal housing. Be very careful with this. Make sure it goes in square and that it's flat and that you don't pop the spring out. Make sure the spring stays intact when you put it in. As you tighten the bolts, be very careful. It doesn't take much force. So now we're moving on to the next part, which is putting the head onto the block. I use a GTE TT head gasket since this is going to be a boosted project. We're making some power with it. Now I did skip the part where it shows me putting everything on, just completely forgot to record, to be honest, but you can do 3 passes starting from the middle, working your way out, and do 25 foot-pounds, 50 foot-pounds, and then 80 foot-pounds for the final pass, making sure that everything goes on snug, nothing catches, nothing binds, and if you feel like it does, don't hesitate to start over and redo the process again. I am very cautious in this stage to make sure we have a good sealing head gasket. I do not use copper spray, by the way. And that's how it looks once we have it on. Now, because my 240SX does not have air conditioning or power steering, we do have to remove the factory Toyota idler pulley, and we will use a S2000 pulley. In order to fit that, though, you will have to grind off these 3 ribs to make clearance for the S2000 pulley. But once you got that done, you can take out your pulley, fabricate a washer to go behind the S2000 pulley, and then you will go ahead and install it. You'll see that it does have ribs on it versus the factory Toyota one that was slick. That's because we're going to be routing the belt differently to where the ribs are now going to be onto this pulley. This will help keep the belt on the system, not have it slip off. And then just go ahead and slip everything back on. Now that stud at the top, I did add that. That doesn't come like that from the factory. And then I like to do things like this finger tight because this is an aluminum head and I do not want to strip any of the threads as I'm starting to thread these in here. And then once you have them on, I believe it's around 20 foot-pounds when I went ahead and torqued it down to. Before putting our cams back in, I do like to go ahead and take some compressed air to it, make sure there's no dust, dirt, hair, grime, or anything on it. I do also go back and wipe this down with a lint-free rag, my hands, gloves, whatever you can to get this thing clean. The last thing you want is any kind of small debris getting back into the motor. Before installing the cams, I do like to bring the pistons away from top dead center. As I put these cams in and I start turning them and I want to check shim clearances, I don't want any of the valves touching the pistons. And I'm sure there's a tool that does this better. This is pretty rudimentary using an extension, but it's always worked for me for the last few motor builds I've done, so I just continue to use something that's simple. And also you want to make sure you reference the service manual as far as turning these cams as you tighten them down. And you want to tighten them down to 14 foot-pounds for every bolt. But again, there's a very extreme sequence of how you have to do this, so make sure you follow the service manual to a T when you do this step. And then go ahead and measure your shims cold. And while I'm at it, I'm also going to go ahead and check the clearances using plastic gauge from the service manual, and we are in spec. To me, measuring shims is one of the more painful processes of doing the cylinder head, especially when they are off. And I believe it was half or more of my shims were out of spec. So I had to go through my box of 200 shims, measure each one individually until I can find the one that fit within my bucket and I actually met clearances. A lot of writing, a bit of math, but eventually you get there. And once you're there and everything fits right, it's an amazing feeling. And knowing that it's done right, you won't have any issues with this part of the motor, it's fantastic. See how it looks when it's done. And for kicks, I went ahead and threw on the turbo manifold. Now we're going to go ahead and seal up the bottom of our engine by using a front sump oil pan, which is what is used on the 240SX. I do like to wipe everything down, use some cleaner, then I take some compressed air to it, then I remove the oil pan, and I will do the same thing again on the inside to make sure there's no debris. And this is particularly important because, again, it's going to be a new motor, so we don't want any kind of small debris in here. I even go to the inside. I'll take some Scotch Brite, maybe some steel wool and some cleaner, then a rag, and I clean it again. And then I go to the mating surfaces where the sealant goes onto, clean all that up with some Scotch Brite, and I blow everything out. Scotch Brite will destroy your motor, so make sure you get everything out of there. Make sure it's incredibly clean so that the sealant will stick and we'll have no debris inside of our motor. Do a quick inspection, make sure everything looks great and that nothing was left behind. You're going to repeat the same process here in a lower oil pan, and really don't worry about how many rags you're going to use, how much cleaner you're going to use, whatever. Really making this as clean as possible is going to be extremely important as you continue to put this motor together. Really, the entire motor must be nothing but cleanliness. So make sure you apply the sealant per the service manual. Clean up your block surface really well. I like to use acetone to clean it all up, let it dry, and then apply your upper oil pan. Then you can sit back and enjoy the look of your work that you've just completed on that part of the process. So 2JZs with front sumps. I've read the oil will slosh to the back when you accelerate. So I ordered a Tomei baffle for the oil pan, and it comes with stickers, gaskets, and some really nice instructions. So make sure you follow the instructions, take everything out, inspect it, make sure there's no slag or burrs hanging up behind. Make sure you wipe it down, get all the dust or maybe even dirt that could be left behind for the machining process. But other than that, these are fairly clean. They're very, very well cut. And you will remove your old baffle and toss that aside and put in your gasket first, because once you have the plates on, it's a very tight squeeze to get your fingers inside. So put your new plate on, go and slide it in there, line up all the holes. Once you have your new plate on, you're going to want to put on your new pickup tube or your strainer, and those nuts that will go on the bottom there, and then the bolt on the other end will be 78 inch-pound. And we will grab our next piece and put this on top. Again, you're going to want to line up all of the holes just like you did with the lower pan, and you will get your hardware and tighten all these into spec. Again, 78 inch-pound for every nut and bolt in this portion. So this actually sucked. I did not realize that there was an F1 baffle and an F2 baffle. The one sitting here in front of us is the F2. I needed an F1, which I did order, and I got it to fit. Some trimming was still necessary, but once the trimming was done, I was able to get the oil pan on. So, lesson learned. Follow the service manual as far as how you should apply the sealant, and in the routing you should do it as shown here. So after trimming down the baffle down some, we were able to get the oil pan snug down to the mounting surface, torqued everything down, and we are looking good. And on the next video, we will start to install the intake manifold and everything else.